let's quilt some waves on our penguin quilt. Hi there, welcome to a new video on the Sugary Dude channel. My name is Irene and today we are going to quilt. I am going to quilt waves with a ruler, the Elvira ruler by Angela Walters on the penguin quilt. And we're finishing up the Penguin Parade quilt along, and in this bonus week we're talking about quilting our quilts. So the other quilt I've quilted with straight lines, and you can find all the information about the quilting on the blog sugarydo.com/ppQAL, Penguin Parade Quilt Along. You can find all the information about this week's blog post there as well, but I thought let's add an extra video about quilting wavy lines with this ruler on one of the penguin quilts. So let's go. Let me show you how you can do this. So what's the plan? Well, this is the plan. We're making double waves with a little bit of space in between, and that can be done with a ruler foot and this ruler. See, that line follows the shape of this ruler really nicely. And in this video I would like to give some more information about the placement of the ruler. And here, for example, you see a marking where I have placed markings on my quilt, and well, how you can make this design as well. Let's start with the markings. So as you can see, I have a marking here and a marking here, and I've made those with my Hera marker. And with this marker you don't put any ink or something like that on your quilt, but you just make a crease. See, it's a very sharp plastic tool, and it's perfect to make creases on your quilt, and they will fade out when you use the quilt or when you wash it. Then the lines will disappear, but they are strong enough so that they will stay in here for some time while you're quilting. And I am placing vertical markings, and I'm not placing any horizontal markings. So the ruler I'm using has a repeat. Whoops, let me see, where do we have the lighting? Yeah, so it has a repeat of the wave every 4 inches. So here's the low point of the wave, 1, 2, 3, 4 inches. So my markings are 4 inches apart. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have a marking here and I have a marking here. So with just a normal inch ruler, I make these markings while I go. The more I move to this side, the longer I will make the markings. Of course, you can also mark your whole quilt in one go, but I like to do it just as I go. So then I know where to place my ruler. So I know that I have to line up this marking on my ruler and this marking on the lines that I marked. See, so there I have to, for these wiggles, I need to place it like this, and for these wiggles I need to put the marking, this longer marking, on my crease. So that is how you can use those vertical markings. I guess that's enough chatting for now and trying to explain it. Let me demonstrate how I do this. So I will demonstrate how we go from the already quilted lines. So you can make one starting line using your your vertical markings to place your ruler, and you can use a horizontal seam to line up to level your ruler. So when you have that first line down, you can make all the other lines from there. So I'll show you how I do that. Let's just pretend that this was the first set of lines that I made, and that we now want to make another line over here. We're going to use the Elvira ruler and I've put on some quilting gloves so that I have more grip. So let's see what I did over here. We have a pair of lines here, and first we're going to make the line that is the most to the right, and then we will make an echoing line to the left of that. And I am going to position my ruler lining up the outer edge of the first line that we did. So the outer edge is going to be on the quilted line. See this quilted line? And while I line it up with this, I make sure that my marking follows the crease that I have in the quilt. So this is my guideline, vertical guideline, and I line it up over here. So when I shift it with this line, so when this line isn't perfect, then I still need to make sure that I have my markings lining up, so that way it's not going to get worse and worse. So I can have a quilted line that's a little bit off, perfectly fine, it happens all the time, but then the markings and lining up the ruler will help me position the lines again in the correct way. So checking again this line on my vertical crease. There we go. Whoops. Okay. Have to get back into this a little bit. Yay, there we go. So now I reposition my ruler, checking that it is on the quilted line over here, and also checking that this marking on the ruler is lining up with this crease. And with the Elvira ruler, you have the needle stops over here, so this little hook makes your ruler foot stop. And it's not the case that you move your ruler all the way to the other needle stop. That will give a little point in your wave. So you start somewhat 3/4 of your ruler. You will start again. So looking at my marking, looking at the quilted line, and when I would perfectly line up my ruler with the quilted line and with the marking, there is a little gap between my ruler foot and the ruler. So it could be that I moved my ruler a little bit, that it should have been here. But that's no big deal at all. So nobody will notice if you shift that a little bit. So what I try to do is always line up again this line, so that all those bellies of the waves will consistently be in one line vertically. And then I line it up with the dotted line at the end here. And then, as you can see what I did here, this would be the perfect position. But then my ruler foot isn't touching the ruler, so then I will just keep it in a good position over here with my left hand, and then I will just move the ruler slightly so that it touches. There we go. Let's see where the next marking is. That is over here. There it is. Yes. So I will quilt all the way to the end, and then I'll show you how to do the echoing line. And another thing you can check and keep in mind when you're repositioning your ruler is if your quilt is pulling. So let's say my quilt is pulling on this left side, so it's a little bit deformed. It's never as bad as this, I think, but then I want to line up my marking and I want to line up my quilting, and you can see that it's just very much off. And it could be that when you reposition your quilt a little bit and make it straight and lay flat, that you can position it on the quilted line and on the marking, and that there's that it all is lined up perfectly. But just when your quilt is pulling, that you can't get those lines to line up. So yeah, that's also something you can check to see what's going on. Okay, so we got to the end of the quilt, and now I am going to go back, and as I said, the line I just quilted was the one the most to the right. So now I'm going to echo the line inside of here, and that has a little bit of more space than 1/4 of an inch. So when I would line up the ruler exactly along those stitches, it would be 1/4 inch. But now I line up the dotted line just 1/4 inch on the inside. On the ruler I line that up with my quilting. So that will give me 1/2 of an inch spacing between those lines. Gives it a little bit of a softer look than having just 1/4 inch. I started with that, so I can also show you over here. So this is just a 1/4 inch, and yes, I changed the plan midway through quilting, but I think that's okay. So maybe fun to show you while we're being honest quilting here. So let me see where I started. I started with this one, a line 1/4 inch apart, and I really liked it. And then I did a second one, but then I did not have the vertical markings down yet. So it was very messy, it shifted, and so when I wanted to echo that and copy this as well, it just did not turn out the way I wanted. So this was kind of a strange wiggle. Then I thought, no, I'll stick to the plan, I will make markings, and made this one and this one and this one. And when I quilted those, I liked the feeling of this better. So I guess that was because there was a little bit more space between these lines. It had a little bit of a softer feel to it. So then I moved this way and thought, well, it's all going to be fine. If I want to make that spacing bigger for the rest of the quilt, I can do that. Nobody is going to stop me. So I changed the plan. So these lines, I'm just going to keep them in. No worry at all for this finished quilt. But yeah, I changed the plan so you can see the different looks. This is what you get when you have 1/4 inch, and this is what you get when you don't have the vertical markings and don't just go with it. Also nice, a little bit more of an organic look, I guess. So this is 1/4 inch again, and here we have those 1/2 inch spacings. Yeah, so different options for you. Okay, let's continue the echoing. With the echoing, I don't pay too much attention to the vertical markings. So I'll just pay attention that that dotted line follows my sewing, and then everything is good enough for me. Whoops. So what I said whoops, that was because my ruler shifted. So I am not on my half-inch line, almost a 1/4 inch now, away from the quilted line. So what I'm going to do is position the end of the ruler, so the dotted line. I'm going to zoom in, maybe then you can see my stitches. I hope so. So what happened here is I'm very close to my stitched line, so I cannot line up my dotted line over here on my stitches. So what I'm going to do is line it up as good as I can. So here I am off, but I make sure that here my dotted line is matching the stitches again. Yeah, so when I get to this point, there we go. Zoom out. Yeah, so when I get to this point, I have the distance of 1/2 inch away from the first line again. And that's not going to show, so it's not worth ripping out those stitches, because ripping out quilted stitches is just so much work. It really is. So don't be bothered too much when it's a little bit off. Nobody will notice. And the final part, that brings us back to this side. Then I'll just go over to that side, get my ruler, and everything starts again in the same way that we started this video. So I will look for my marking, that is over here, over here. So I have to line up this line with that marking, and I have to try to follow this quilted line with the outside of the ruler. Yeah, so there we go. I will quilt a few lines, and when I get to the top of the penguin over here, I will show you how I do checkups if my waves are still on the horizontal. Okay, we're back to this side. I have finished all my marking on the top of the quilt, and now I can see that some specific lines in the quilt are coming up again. So we have sashing over here, and we have the top of the penguins. Those are nice horizontal reference lines. So what I can do, what I can use those for, is to check if my wavy line is still on the horizontal, and if not, that I'm altering it a little bit. So what I like to do is to line up my ruler just like I would for the next line, and then see if there are maybe some markings on my ruler. As you can see, there are horizontal dotted lines over here that line up with the quilt. And now I can see that the top dotted line over here does line up with the top of the penguin. So for this part of the wavy line, that is the case. So let's see if in the next penguin that's also the case. And I can see here that I'm a little bit off. I'll zoom in so you can see. So here the top seam, the line between the light part and the green part of the penguin is in between these dotted lines. So what I'm going to do is shift this down a tiny bit. Let's check for the next penguin. There we go. And as well here, so it's almost on the top dotted line. So I'm just going to shift it down a tiny bit so it looked like my wavy lines were going in this direction a little bit instead of going straight. So I can correct that by just noting the dotted lines on the ruler and using those markings to get my lines on the horizontal again. So let's finish this quilt. So there we got to the first part, and I just pay most attention to this dotted line and the vertical marking. So that's going to be my new reference, and I do look a little bit at this wavy line that I'm supposed to line my ruler up with, but mostly I'm just going to check my new picked marking over here on the horizontal and this marking on the vertical. So on this position, my referring point is the seam over here. So I have that over here and the seam on the next penguin over here. So I also have a little marking there, and I have that line over here. Completed penguin quilt, all quilted with pretty wavy wavies. So there you go, that's the look of a complete quilt, quilted with wavy lines. It's really soft and still very, how do you say that? What's the word? Not stiff, the opposite of stiff, movable, squishable, cuddly. So it's a really lovely texture to a quilt. So there you have it. That's how you quilt this quilt with the Elvira ruler. See you next time. Bye.